Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Stelter, president here at the Stelter Company, and thanks for joining us for our webinar today, Building Donor Loyalty, Lessons from 25 Years of Research, presented by Professor Adrian Sargeant, who's actually the co-director for the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. I'll get back to introducing Adrian in just a quick minute, but first I'd like to say just a couple words around the webinar series. Many of you are already familiar. As an industry leader in plan giving marketing, Stelter is committed to providing these innovative solutions and education for industry. We're always happy to host this complimentary webinar series, as well as a whole slate of webinars throughout the year. Today's webinar is actually our 10th. It's been a busy year in 2021. Still on the schedule for this year, presenters Jen Sheng, teaching us how to love our donors, and Phil Purcell to help you get your board on board with plan giving. As always, you can register for our remaining webinars or even view some of our past webinars from earlier in the year from Russell James, Catherine Myrie, and others at stelter.com/webinars. And we'll always send out invitations ahead of time as well as those dates get closer. Now back to today's webinar and our presenter, Adrian Sargeant. Adrian is the co-director of the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. He's formerly the first Hartsook Chair in Fundraising at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. Also a visiting professor of fundraising at Avila University and the Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Studies at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. Adrian's designed the UK's system of professional education for fundraisers and is currently working on the European qualification framework for the European Fundraising Association. In 2010, he was named to the Nonprofit Times Power and Influence Top 50, and in the same year received a Civil Society Award in the UK for his services to the profession of fundraising. In 2016, he received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Institute of Fundraising, and we're very excited to have Adrian here with us today. I will hand it off to Adrian for our talk this afternoon. Adrian, all yours.
Well, thank you for the introduction. As you've just heard, my name's Adrian, and I'm going to take 45, 50 minutes of your life away now to talk about the topic of building donor loyalty. What I'm going to cover in that time frame is a little bit about why loyalty is important. We're going to talk about some of the key metrics like lifetime value. And of course, we're going to talk about the things that drive that donor lifetime value. And as we get to the very end of the session, I'll talk about some of the sort of issues that nonprofits are kind of wrestling with right now. So top of that list was, is retention an issue? And oh yeah, yes. Retention is an issue. That's why we're all here. And it's an issue because even small improvements in loyalty in the here and now translate to whopping improvements in the lifetime value of the fundraising database. Improving retention by 10% in the here and now increases the value of the database by anything up to 50%. Why is that? Well, because the effect compounds over time. You lose fewer people this year, you've got more donors next year, you're going to lose even fewer of them. And so the effect builds over time. Now, of course, for many organizations, that's not the end of the story. If you're using a range of traditional media like direct mail to recruit donors into the organization, it's going to be costing you a significant amount of money to do that. So if you're not losing people, you don't have to replace them, and you can save all of that expenditure for other things. My little 10% improvement in that scenario can translate into anything up to 100% improvement in the value of the database. And even that's not the end of the story, because of course, if people hang around for longer, they do sexy stuff. They upgrade the level of their gift. They give to the emergency appeal, to the capital campaign. They volunteer. And if we can keep them around for long enough, maybe they might even think about leaving us a legacy at the end of their lifetime. Some of those things, tough to put a dollar value on. But if you try, my little improvement in loyalty in the here and now can anything up to double the value of the fundraising database. So is loyalty an issue? Oh, yes. And there's good news in a sense. There's a lot we can do to improve, right? The current pattern of loyalty is dreadful. Now, I was ashamed by this data, because you can tell from my accent that I'm a Brit, even though I'm now a US citizen. And what this tells me is that in the UK, we routinely lose half of the new donors that we bring in. So half of the people we recruit won't be giving to us next year. And then there's a sort of steady trickle thereafter. So that's terrible. And the news gets even worse because generally the tenure of donors is increasing. Right, so back in 2000, when we were recruiting donors, the lifetime was about 6.5 years. Now it's only about 4.5 years, and the latest data suggests it's even lower than that. So we've got a big problem, right? And like I said, I was kind of ashamed by this until I moved to the United States and I realized, hey, no, this is a really good pattern of performance, because in the States, it's much worse. And the good people at the Fundraising Effectiveness Project tell us that anything up to 80% first year attrition is kind of the norm. Dreadful patterns of loyalty and retention in the United States. But turning that around, there are also huge opportunities to be able to do better than that. Now, I've already in this presentation used the buzzword lifetime value. And being an academic, you'd think, well, Adrian's probably into definitions. There's the definition. It's the total net contribution that a customer generates during his or her lifetime value. How much value is there in the relationships that we have with supporters? That's in essence what lifetime value is all about. And as a sector, we've been a little bit slow to wake up to lifetime value thinking, right? The commercial world got there 30 years ago now. Now, one of the first commercial organizations that started to think about lifetime value is an organization called P&O, large, multinational, diversified organization, do a whole range of stuff. But one of the things they do is cruises, where you can head out to the Caribbean or the Bahamas somewhere and lie back on the deck of some ocean liner, and they'll come along and ply you with good food, drink, and probably a virus or two, right? So that's what P&O do. Now, P&O were interested, well, what's the value really in a typical P&O customer relationship? So they look back over 5 years and they drew a little pyramid. Of course, their numbers would be different from mine, but it turns out to be a pyramid because inevitably you've got a lot of customers at the lower end of the database that aren't worth that much. And then as you get up to the top, there are just a few people who are, massively valuable to the organization. So it always comes out as a pyramid. And it came out as a pyramid for P&O. They looked back then over 10 years, drew another pyramid, thought that's very nice. Finally, they looked back over 15 years. So here's my question to you. In 15 years, what do you think is the maximum number of days somebody might have spent on board a P&O cruise vessel? And you can feel free to guess because they have no idea either. But I'll spare you the pain of sharing. They found a little lady at the top of the pyramid called Elsie Naylor, who is now part of marketing folklore, right? Because she'd spent no less than 4,100 days on board P&O cruise vessels, and they didn't know who she was. Now, you could say, well, hey, Adrian, doesn't really matter because she's still there bobbing up and down on the boat every day. Who cares? Well, of course, Elsie might still be having contact with the organization, but there may be many others that got fed up of being ignored over the years and decided to go off somewhere else where they're appreciated. Some champagne, some flowers, shaken warmly by the hand for parting with that cash over the years. None of it for Elsie. They'd ignored her for the best part of 15 years. Now, the first thing that lifetime value gets you really is a sense of who are your most important customers on the database. So for P&O, that's Elsie and her chums. And in fundraising, we do a little bit of that by default, because that top chunk of the pyramid there, we're going to probably call that major gifts, and we'll have a very special strategy for looking after those individuals. It'll be much more personal, much more one-to-one, much more hands-on. They'll have a closer relationship with the organization. But even within the balance of the fundraising database, though, maybe we should ask ourselves, should we treat Elsie and her chums a little differently from the balance of the fundraising database? Too many nonprofits talk about their donor attrition rate, right? Well, you lose a few people at the bottom end of the pyramid there, that's sad, but that's not really going to hurt you. Lose a few towards the top end of the pyramid, and that's going to be incredibly impactful. So it makes much more sense to look at attrition rates by the value segment on the database so that we can spend our resources trying to retain donors who are higher value. Now, there's a second thing that lifetime value can get you. One of the other big commercial organizations that got into it early was an organization called Domino Pizza. And my guess is that irrespective of where you are, you will have a Domino Pizza somewhere near you. And for years, they'd been thinking about their customer acquisition like this. They'd think, well, we're going to sell this pizza for $10. It's probably going to cost us maybe $5 to produce it. It's going to cost us $2 to deliver it. We must make $2 profit on it. And so I know we'll spend $1 to recruit that customer into the organization. And that for years is how they were thinking about acquisition. And then they did some maths and they calculated that over the full duration of a relationship that you have with a Domino Pizza customer, that they would typically be worth about $3,500. And there we are, only spending $1 to bring that person into the organization. They could get a bit more relaxed. Let's spend $5 or $10 or $100 or well, maybe not 1,000, but you get my idea, right? The second thing that lifetime value gets you is the allowable cost to bring in the right customers, or in our world, the right donors into the organization for the first time. One of the reasons we have terrible patterns of retention and loyalty in the States is because the new fundraising skill set is being really adept at bringing in people who will never give again, right? That's the new fundraising skill set. So it makes more sense to concentrate the resource. Equally, third thing that lifetime value can give you is a sense of who you want to recruit into the organization. Lots of organizations profile the database, look at who's giving to them now, and then try and go out and find other people who in some way match those characteristics. Right, it's direct response fundraising 101 in a sense. The problem with that, though, is that most databases are dominated, as you can see in my pyramid there, by people who aren't worth that much to the organization and will probably quit soon. Right? So any profile you do that's very generic like that is going to be heavily weighted by the profile of these people that aren't worth very much, and then we'll go out very successfully and bring them into the organization. Makes much more sense to say, well, does Elsie and her chums have any characteristics that make them a little different from the rest of the database? Possibly in terms of demographics, but more likely in terms of interests, behaviors, and so on. Because then maybe we could go out and bring other Elsies into the organization and enjoy that value. Now, for many organizations, that right there would be a huge leap forward. That's good, but that's not state of the art, right? Because state of the art says, we could go out and bring lots of Elsies into the organization, but warm, cuddly human being though she is, she's probably in her 80s and she's going to peg it sometime soon, right? So I can't think of a better way of saying that. So do we really want to bring people in who aren't going to be here very long? Probably not. So if you think about it, it's not so much the profile of what Elsie looks like today that should drive our new donor acquisition. It's what did she first look like when she started giving to the organization? Because if we can find people like that, we can have that longer lifetime relationship with those individuals. So that's kind of what lifetime value gives you, a whole range of different benefits, really. Now, implicit in what I've said is that there are 4 different ways of looking at value. One of the things that really irks me in our sector is that we use terminology very sloppily. Is that a word? Maybe. Sloppily. So we use lifetime value when we mean other things. So you can look at value as the historic value of an individual on the database. So based on how much this person has given to us in the past, I can take a decision about the stewardship that person's going to enjoy in the future, right? That's historic value. Or more usually, perhaps I do that on the basis of a segment. So based on how much this group of people have given to us in the past, they'll get this standard of care from me moving forward. What lifetime value is, though, is a projection into the future. So based on my understanding of how people like this person have behaved in the past, how do I think you're going to behave in the future and what value is going to be in that relationship? And I'll take my stewardship decisions on that basis. And again, you can imagine that more usually that's at the level of the segment. Based on my understanding of how groups of people like this group have behaved in the past, this is the value I see in the relationship, this is the standard of care. So 4 ways of looking at it. And if that already sounds complicated, that's good news to come, because it gets even more complicated. Now, I thought I'd show you this to scare you. And actually, it isn't all that scary. This is the bottom right box of my previous slide. How do you calculate the lifetime value of a donor? Well, you say, what am I likely to get in revenue this year? What's it going to cost me to service the relationship? Take one from the other, I get my contribution this year. Then I look out to year 2 and I think, well, what am I likely to get in revenue? What's it going to cost me to service the relationship? Take one from the other, I get my contribution in year 2. Look at year 3, revenue, costs, contribution, and so on. Now, What I can't do to arrive at a figure for lifetime value is to simply add all of those contributions together. Why? Well, if I were to offer you a $1,000 donation, would you like to have it today or in 5 years' time? Most of you are going to say, well, want it today, please, because it'll buy more service provision than it will in 5 years. And there's also an element of risk in the sense that I might change my mind over 5 years and decide not to give you the 1,000, or I might fall under a bus and that would be the end of it. And so to take account of all of that, those future contributions, we have to discount them back to a value at today's prices. And then we can add them together to come up with this sort of sense of how much value there might be in the relationship. Now, there are some difficult decisions that go into that. And these decisions actually make it pretty much impossible to compare lifetime value from one organization to another. I've heard people try and do it, but to me, it doesn't make a great deal of sense, right? Because you don't know what revenues they put in for a start. They probably put in annual revenues. Did they put in maybe any money they might give to an emergency appeal or a capital campaign, or put a value on any volunteering they might do, or maybe even model the likelihood that this person might need a bequest of some kind, right? So these are arbitrary decisions. There's no one right way of calculating it. It's kind of up to you. Equally, I've glibly been talking about a lifetime like as if it goes on forever. And of course it doesn't. In consumer markets, businesses usually model lifetime value looking at about 5 years. In our world, we might model future value looking at over 3 or 4 years. And again, it's an arbitrary decision. And then I said, you discount back the value of those contributions to evaluate today's prices. Well, how do we do that? Is that like at the level of inflation? Or do we want to be conservative and call it twice the level of inflation? Or do we want to do what the accountants love to do, which is to frankly just pluck a random number out of the air and call it 8%, right? Again, it's an arbitrary decision. It's worth managing the complexity though, because it allows us, when we've got lifetime value, to think about that allowable cost per donor. How much can we be prepared to spend to bring the right donors in? It also allows us to take smarter decisions over what channels we use to acquire new donors. 90% of fundraisers in the US will do that based on the return on investment they got last year, right? So what return on investment do we get from this? What return on investment do we get from that? What return on investment do we get from this? Oh, that one had the higher return on investment. Let's plow our acquisition resource into that channel. And that's wrong, right? Because donors who come in from different channels will have different lifetime values. So when you start to look at the lifetime return that you get from different channels, you'll probably take a very different decision over where you're going to put that acquisition budget. What else? Setting the criteria for donor marketing. In other words, should we treat Elsie and her chums any differently from lower value segments on the database? And 9 times out of 10, even taking major gifts out of the equation, the answer is probably going to be yes to that, right? Because we don't want to lose any of those higher value segments. We want to minimize attrition there. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about lifetime value. That was my first promise to you. My second promise was to talk about what it is that drives it then. And frankly, 20 odd years ago, when I first started researching this, we had no idea, right? There was a lot of information out there about what drives customer retention and customer value, but not a lot about fundraising. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some of the important work on customer retention, and then we'll get into fundraising retention. So there are really 3 bodies of literature about what it is that drives customer retention. The first of them is exit polling. So you'll see surveys from time to time in things like the Harvard Business Review. This is typical of that, right? There's always a certain amount of what I would call natural attrition. Death and relocation accounts for some donor attrition. And frankly, because our donors are older than the balance of society, those numbers are going to be higher than you see there. Is there anything else interesting in that list? Nah, not so much. The second body of literature is altogether more entertaining because it comes from something called relationship marketing. And relationship marketing wants to tell me that the things that go wrong in the relationships I have with my customers or donors or campaigners are exactly the sort of things that go wrong in the relationship I might have with my boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, my significant other. All of which begs the question, if you wanted to clear your life of your significant other, what might you do? And if this were a therapy session, we could have some fun for the next 20 minutes, but perhaps not. I'll give you my list instead. right? So if you want to clear your life, you ignore them, you lie to them, you're uncivil, you increase prices. You can mull the relationship parallel with that one, but yeah, all of those things you do. So if you want loyalty and retention, you do the converse of these things. At least that's what the advice is. There's a lovely story. I'm thinking about this line saying "be uncivil" on there for a minute. There was a lovely story of a high street bank not long ago in the UK that decided it was going to write to all of its really high-value customers. And unfortunately, it was for an investment proposition. Unfortunately, they left the responsibility for the salutation field in the mailing with an employee that had just been disciplined. So yes, instead of all the letters going out to "Dear Mr. Jones, dear Mrs. Bloggs, dear Mrs. Miggins," all the letters went out to "Dear Rich Bastard," which of course wasn't quite the positioning that the bank were looking for. But on the plus side, they had a much higher response rate from that mailing than from the mailings they would normally use. And a few people had even written in to say how refreshing it was for the bank to just be honest with them for a change. Anyway, that's a high-risk strategy in fundraising. Now, the third body of literature is much more useful, and it's about the underlying things that go on in relationships. And my guess is that you haven't stayed in a hotel, got on a plane, made any significant purchase, got your car serviced, something like that, without someone wanting to know, how was it for you, right? How satisfied were you with the experience? And usually what these marketing folk will do is to crack out the experience into component parts. How was this? How was that? How was that? And then at the end of the questionnaire, there's a sort of question which says, overall, how satisfied are you? And marketing people like me, we love that, right? Because when you've got that, you can draw graphs. Now, here what you're looking at is customer satisfaction model on a 5-point scale. 1's a very dissatisfied, 2 is dissatisfied, 3 is kind of neutral, 4 is satisfied, 5 very satisfied. So you can see in this example, about 2% of people are very dissatisfied, 4% dissatisfied, 12% are pretty neutral, 37% are satisfied, 45% very satisfied. Now, is that a good set of results? If you've got that with your donors, your campaigners, your service users, is that grounds for celebration or suicide? Well, here's the rub, right? And this is why the whole world now wants to know how satisfied you are. Because in the commercial world, across a whole range of different industries and sectors, they've determined that people who say they are very satisfied, 6 times more likely to come back and buy again than people who are just satisfied. Behaviorally, there's a massive difference between very satisfied and just satisfied. And if you think about it, there's kind of a logic with that, right? Because if you've ever ticked that 4 box, you've ticked it thinking, yeah, it was all right, it was a reasonably pleasant experience. Yeah, but it was just that one thing that kind of let it down. And so the next time you're in the market for that service, you're going to look for that total satisfaction, as it were. So the job for this set of results, frankly, is to move more of those satisfied people over into very satisfied. That's how they would build loyalty. Now, some of you might be sat there thinking, well, what about these folks down here? Are we just going to ignore them? No, let's look at them in a bit more detail. You can probably guess that people who've given you 1s and 2s are doing that because something's gone wrong for them in the experience. So on this slide, we're looking at everybody in this slide has had a problem. And we're looking at the percentage of people who will buy again under certain circumstances. And blue boxes, big problems, orange boxes, small problems. So over here, we're looking at a group of people who've had a major problem and they haven't complained. Only 8% of them in this example would come back and buy again. It was a minor problem, 31. Then we've got a group of people who had a major problem. They've complained and the organizations frankly just ignored them. 18% will buy again, major problem, 46% minor problem. And then a group of people who had a major problem, they complained, and after some messing about, the organization fixed it. About 53% will buy again if it's a minor problem, 69%. 53% major problem, 69% minor problem. I'll get my teeth in. And then finally, a group of people who had a major problem, and then the organization has been fantastic about putting it right then and there to their satisfaction. 81% will buy again if it was a major problem, 94% minor problem. Now, is there anything interesting in that graph? Well, this fascinates me down here. You see the difference between being able to complain and not being able to complain. What this tells me is that even if you couldn't care less about your donors, campaigners, service users, whoever this is, you're still better off to put somebody at the end of the phone to take the call, right? Oh, okay. Oh, all right then. Right, even if you've got no intention at all of doing anything about it, you're still better off giving people that opportunity to complain. Because in doing so, there's a little healing process that takes place, right? They have the opportunity to tell somebody how bad the experience was. Now, the other thing I think that's interesting in this graph is, remember I said everybody in this graph has had a problem. Right, so let me give you one more tidbit of information here. The average repurchase rate across people who never had a problem is about here. How do you get loyalty? Yeah, exactly. You go out and you create thousands of problems for people and you put them right, right? And then you'll get a lot more loyalty than if they'd never had a problem in the first place. This too is high risk, but there's so much research behind this. It has a name. It's called the service recovery paradox. People who've had an issue, they've complained, you fixed it, more loyal than those that never had a problem in the first place. This is why now in the States, we don't talk about complaints anymore. It's opportunities, as in opportunities to build loyalty. Terminology, though, that can be a little disconcerting when you meet it for the first time. I can remember coming down to pay a hotel bill one morning and they said, good morning, Dr. Sargeant, how are you this morning? Do you have any opportunities last night? And I'm thinking, why would I tell you? Anyway, so much for the commercial world. What about donor loyalty? Here's exit polling from our world. These are not in rank order because I've grouped them for a reason that will become apparent in a minute. But these are the top 10 things that American donors will say, that's why I stopped giving to that organization. And as you would expect, there's a chunk of people who say, well, I just can't afford to continue my support, changing my financial circumstances, there's an illness in the family, whatever. That's understandable. What's less understandable is this notion of who? What? I never sent money to them. People forgot that they sent a check in to the organization, 12, 18 months ago. Supporting by other means maybe I'm not giving to the national association anymore, I'm giving to a local group, or I'm volunteering my time, or I'm doing something else. Death and relocation, always a certain amount of natural attrition. And then what you'll notice at the bottom of the list is that these are service quality issues. Anytime we do any work on donor loyalty and retention, donor satisfaction with the quality of service provided by the fundraising team is there writ large. So is this a good pattern of results? This is what American donors think of American fundraising, right? How satisfied are you? Well, on the one hand, you think, well, Adrian, this is pretty good news. Nobody hates us. Yeah, but hang on, this is a survey of donors, right? If they hated us that much, they wouldn't be our donors, right? So the fact there's not much going on at the lower end is not awfully inspiring. A big chunk of people, not sure. 37% of people say, yeah, that's pretty good. And only about 9% are really very satisfied. Now, I told you in the commercial world, there's a huge difference between people who say I'm very satisfied and people who say that they're just satisfied. Factor of 6 between those two. In fundraising, people who say I'm very satisfied, twice as likely to be giving to you next year as people who say they're just satisfied. Right, so it's a huge behavioral difference. So donor satisfaction with the quality of service provided by the fundraising team is a massive issue for the sector to address. And perceptions are frankly grim. Go figure why we've got terrible levels of retention, right? Now, if you're motivated enough to want to measure it, and I'm going to suggest that maybe you might, right? Because this is going to be one of the big drivers of loyalty and retention, measure it on a scale from maybe 1 to 7, right? Because all the action is happening at the extreme end of the scale. What you're looking at here are the results from 5 different organizations. Each one of the colored lines is an organization. And you can see that they're all pretty close together until you get towards the end of that satisfaction scale. And then they start to diversify, right? And in that is the explanation for the levels of loyalty that these organizations have. So if you're going to measure it in the extreme with a 7-point scale. And then you can track how well you're doing and maybe reward fundraisers for improvements that they've been able to make to that level of donor satisfaction. That's not rocket science, by the way. In the commercial world, marketers are routinely rewarded for the level of customer satisfaction they're able to engender. And that's why the whole world needs to know how satisfied you are. It's important. Now, going back to the commercial world, it was realized some years ago that, strange but true, sometimes even people are really satisfied with the quality of service they get, don't come back and buy again. And why it turns out that is because although they're very satisfied, they lack commitment to the organization, the product, the brand. And I thought a few years ago that it would be interesting to explore how that notion of commitment plays out in our non-profit world. Because intuitively, you think people are really passionate to see the mission of the organization achieved, they're going to be a lot more loyal maybe than people who are not. So it was intuitive to us that commitment would drive loyalty, but we really had no idea what it might be that would drive commitment. And if you're ever in that scenario, you'll probably do some qualitative work, in our case, focus groups, to see what might be going on. And incidentally, there will be a short test before the end of today's webinar. So I hope you're taking notes. Now, look, this is based on focus group data. I don't know how many of you have run focus groups, probably quite a few, I'm guessing. One of the things I've learned over 25 years is that there is a reason why they are free at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. Right? There's a reason for that. People who come to focus groups are sometimes a little quirky, right? And so would you really want to base a strategy on that? Probably not. But of course, what focus groups are really good at doing is to tease out what might be going on and the factors that might be in play. And then you can test that quantitatively with a survey and see what of those relationships will be real. So that's what we did. What did we find? Well, we found that there were 2 different types of commitment. First of all, there's passive commitment, which is just a sense that I'm doing the right thing. So in my life, I support breakthrough breast cancer. Mercifully, nobody in my immediate circle of family and friends has been hurt by that. But reading their materials, I've realized of all the cancers, like, this is the one we are going to nail. We're going to nail that sucker in the next 5 or 10 years, right? We're so close. So am I going to cancel my gift? Well, no, because that feels wrong to me. It just feels like, you know, I want to do that. But it's not one of those things that I, hand on heart, would say I'm really passionate about. There are other causes that I am desperate to see the mission of the organization fulfilled. And that's what we mean by this notion of active commitment here. So what else do we see? Anytime you do any work on donor loyalty and retention, donor satisfaction with the quality of service provided by the fundraising team is always there. And it turns out it has a direct relationship with loyalty and also a relationship with commitment. Go figure. What else? Risk. If I'm giving to support a shelter for homeless people, and I believe that by cancelling my gift, nobody's going to suffer any harm, I'm more likely to cancel my gift. By contrast, if I think that by cancelling my gift, somebody somewhere is going to be without a bed tonight, I'm more likely to continue my gift to support the work of the organization. What else? I talked about commitment as being this burning passion to see the mission of the organization achieved, and that's powerful in terms of loyalty. It's even more powerful, though, if I buy into not only what you want to do, but how you want to do it. The beliefs of your organizations, the passions of your organizations, the values of your organization. And if that's me, much more committed, much more loyal to the organization. Now, I already said, mercifully, nobody in my immediate family have had or been hurt by breast cancer. But you can imagine that had they been, I would be out to put an end to that. Right? So a personal link to a cause, as you would expect, really massively pumps up that level of commitment. What else? Learning. Does it feel like that I'm developing a relationship with this organization? Am I developing my understanding of what they do, their work, what they stand for, and so on? Or are they just kind of shouting at me periodically, give us money for this, give us money for that, give us money for something else? Multiple engagements. What's that? Well, there's a micro and a macro level to that. The obvious macro level is that if somebody is a donor, and a campaigner, and a service user, and a volunteer, every time you get an and, you get a whopping amount more loyalty. Right, so one of the things we understand to build loyalty is you need to engage people to interact with the cause in different ways. And the more ways they do it, the more loyal they're going to be to the organization. In a sense, as I sit here saying that, it's kind of obvious. What's less obvious is the micro dimension to it. I suggested a few moments ago that you might want to measure donor satisfaction, right? It's a big driver of loyalty. You might measure that. You might measure commitment. And I'm going to go on in a minute and suggest that you measure trust. If you do that, and you take a little sample of your donors and you get some data, if you track those folks afterwards, I'll guarantee that they'll be a little bit more loyal than the folks you didn't ask for an opinion. Right, just not a lot, but just a little tiny detectable bit. And the reason for that is that you've had a two-way interaction with them, right? So that you've written to them and they're thinking, oh, that's right, I got a relationship with the Salvation Army, I'll fill out the questionnaire at once. Oh, that's right, I got a relationship with Greenpeace, I'll fill out the questionnaire or not. And every time you have one of those little two-way interactions and acknowledgement that, oh yeah, I'm a supporter of X, so the person begins to internalize that a little bit more and you get a little bit more loyalty formed as a consequence. And of course, the really great news today is that with digital channels, it's so easy to have those little two-way interactions. You know, take our little quiz, sign up for the newsletter, take action on this, tell us your views on something else, fill out the annual donor survey for us. You know, this is easy to do in the digital space. And incrementally, if you're able to get those little tiny interactions taking place, you know, it will add up into a substantive improvement to loyalty at the end of the day. Remember, even small improvements in loyalty translate to big improvements in the value of the fundraising database. So they're all worth chasing. Now, I left this one to last. Why? Well, some of you might be sat there thinking, oh, Adrian's droned on for hours now about donor satisfaction with the quality of service provided by the fundraising team. What about all of that fantastic work we're doing in the community? Surely that's got to stand for something, right? I mean, it must make a difference somewhere. And of course it does. But the mechanism for most donors is trust. Because if I give you $20 to immunize a child today, frankly, I have no idea whether you immunize that child. Right? No idea. If I'm a major donor giving you 20 million to put up a building, I can see the building. I know you've done it, right? But for most donors, they have to trust that when you say you're going to do something, you actually went out and did it. And so trust is a massively important construct, because it's through that beliefs about our performance come into play and impact on loyalty. And as you can see, there's a direct relationship and also an impact on commitment. I said measure satisfaction on 7-point scales. You can measure commitment on 7-point scales. And what you'll see, again, it's the same spread of organizations here. The diversion always occurs at the end of the scale, and it's in that difference that you see there, you know, that's what is beginning to explain the loyalty of the supporter base, and it's the same for trust, really. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that you measure those things. In the commercial world, they are routinely measuring satisfaction, commitment, and trust. And I think in our world, it's about time we adopted some of those practices. I think that would be a huge leap forward for our sector. I don't think it's the end of our journey, because I think there are other things that we might measure that are more philanthropy-based and more love-based, because frankly, philanthropy is about love. It's not just about cash and all the metrics that we use in the commercial world. So maybe we might, over time, move to consider having metrics that are based on the love that builds up in relationships. And intuitively, you think, you know, maybe there's some mileage in that. We'll have data on that in about 6 months, so I'll be able to come back and tell you how that plays out. Things to avoid: Net Promoter Score. There is, watch my lips, no evidence that Net Promoter Scores are good predictors of donor retention and donor lifetime value. This thing has been one of the most hyped measures in retention history, and academics therefore have studied, you know, how robust the whole concept of a net promoter is. And you don't want to go there. If you want to know more about why, go to our website, philanthropy-institute.org.uk, and take a look at a report I authored with Kevin Shulman, and we'll explain the dynamics of that. If you haven't heard of Net Promoter Score before, good. All right, I said I'd close on some practical advice, and I've got, what, 10 minutes? 10 minutes of my canter remaining. So what can I talk about that would be helpful? Well, I would draw a distinction between communication cycles and donor journeys, right? All too often we use the terminology interchangeably in our world, and for me, they're different. This is a communication cycle. It's an Australian example, actually, and it tells me that they acquire donors into cash gifts, think annual fund, through direct mail, press advertising, new media appeals, digital in other words, and they recruit people into regular monthly giving through direct dialogue, digital, direct mail, and some of the events that they run. All those folks get a nice thank you, and then the cycle talks about what they're going to receive. So cash donors, annual fund donors, get 3 printed newsletters with soft appeals. They get ad hoc invitations to the organization's events and 4 cash appeals a year. They also get an opportunity to upgrade to a regular monthly contribution because, of course, monthly donors, lifetime values are 600–700% higher, right? So again, another way you can enhance value is to punch people towards a regular monthly contribution. What do they get? Because they're younger, they get a digital newsletter, not a print one. They get an end-of-year tax receipt. They also get ad hoc invitations to events, and they get an upgrade call after 6 months. So after I've been giving at a set level for 6 months, I get an upgrade, and then I'll be upgraded every 12 months thereafter. That is a communication cycle. A donor journey is thinking about what I want to expose people to early on in the relationship, but it's really important they know up front, and then the order in which I want people to develop their understanding. It's also about thinking how I want to make people feel as they move into a relationship with our organization, and how that relationship should feel to them as it begins to unfold. And we need to get smarter at thinking about both these things, because just your communication cycle isn't going to cut it. What else? Well, remember my notion of multiple engagements, and that people have more interactions with the organization in different ways, they become more loyal. Well, maybe we could liaise with partners in other parts of the organization who are doing interesting stuff, whether that's service provision or, in my example here, campaigning. So this is the International League for the Protection of Horses. And if you're a horsey person, you will be outraged to discover that live horses are literally shipped across Europe in lorries that look a bit like this, and then they are slaughtered for their meat at the end of their journey. Right? If you're a horse person, ooh, you get angry about that, right? Now you can see that this is a fundraising appeal because there's the response mechanism, but there's also an opportunity here to tell a politician what you think about the fact that this is happening to horses. And you can send off your message to your member of the European Parliament, or at least you can if you're not living in England at the moment, and you can send that off and you can feel good, right? So this pack contains 2 ways in which I can feel really great about myself today. I made a gift to support the work, but I've also told these politicians what they need to do to get that sorted. So if we can think of other ways of engaging with people, that will punch the level of loyalty. Incidentally, it's not just the International League for the Protection of Horses who've discovered that that's a sensible thing. ACLU, activists taking 2 or more actions between September and November, 4 times more likely to donate at year's end. Donors taking 2 or more action produce 26% more revenue at year end than non-activists. And these results are kind of typical, right? We need to do more kind of cross-selling. So it's not really about winning campaigns in the sense of that advocacy and campaigning. It's really just about using them as a mechanism for building that strong sense of commitment to the organization. What else? Maybe we might survey our donors, right? It's another one of those little 2-way interactions that can take place. Here's an email from Save the Children, and they're going to show me some images that they're thinking about using in their campaigns, and they want my views about how appropriate I think they might be. You can ask people about how they feel about your work, the things that most interest them. That, if you record it, of course, can be the basis for some segmentation. So we can talk to people about their interests, and maybe we can ask them a little bit about their intentions and what they're doing to support the work of the organization. Maybe we can identify some bequest givers in that way. And maybe we can just use them to help build a stronger sense of relationship. I love this. This is the Guide Dogs for the Blind Association, what we'd call in the States Seeing Dogs. And some organizations are a little bit shy about asking people for legacies, right? Because it's all about death. course it's not, but ride with it, right? So the proposition here is not that I'm going to ask you for a legacy gift today, but I am going to ask you for your help, because we're going to run a legacy campaign, and I want to know which of these cases would be the most powerful, right? So I don't want you to give, I just want you to read these campaign messages and then give us some feedback over which one would be appropriate, and we're going to put that in our newsletter moving forward. This is so smart, right? Because now you might not have asked me for a legacy, but I've now read 4 reasons why I should think about leaving a legacy to your organization today. It's incredibly smart. And of course, as well, it helps build up that relationship, because they're calling on me for some help and advice. And that just cements the fact, yes, I am in a relationship with this organization. What else? Well, we might think about giving donors some control over the communication that they received. The Camp Hill community was one of the very first organizations to do that. They used to print a questionnaire that you can see there on the back of everything they send out. And the options would be, don't darken my door again. Write to me at Christmas, but not at other times of the year. Keep me up to date with news, but don't ask me for money. It's kind of an interesting segment, because they raise more money from them than they do from other segments, and so on. Now, back in the day, I'd be saying, yeah, choice is a good thing, let's do it. Now I'd say to you, let's offer some choice when it's meaningful. If you ask me today, would you like to receive a newsletter, Adrian? I'm likely going to say no, because obviously newsletters are boring, right? So we don't want to do that. But if you wait 9 or 12 months, when I've had a few of these things and I've discovered, actually, I really enjoy your storytelling and I like these stories and I like the information, more likely I'm going to say, yes, send it to me. So choice is good, but I would wait until people can make meaningful choices over what would be right for them. And then the very final thing I'd say is, let's get our thank you right. Why? John Grain Associates tell us that donors think it is the most important communication they receive. 7 out of 10 people have better recall of the note, the thank you note, than the appeal, but 7 out of 10 people say it's ordinary, predictable, and banal. And I'd agree with that, because this is the kind of rubbish that people send out. What you're looking at here is a before and after version. Before, really great copywriter by the name of Lisa Sargeant got at it. So in the old days, they would say, "Dear Adrian, thank you so much for your gift of $100 in support of the Ontario Science Centre. Science and technology enriches our lives, and a single visit to the Science Centre can plant a seed and provide the tools for a lifetime of exploration and boredom." Right? The first problem with it is it's dull as dishwater. And notice how it's all about how great they are, right? Compare that with the after version. "Dear Adrian, robots whir, comets streak, tide pools gurgle. When science comes to life, anything is possible, and all because of you." Ooh, yes, that's why I give to the organization. And notice the really smart thing they did to make me feel really good about being a supporter of the organization is that they have merged me with the organization, so that together it is us that is making this magical difference and bringing this science alive. Another example, just to illustrate. "Dear Adrian, on behalf of," and by the way, I hate it when organizations do that. It's almost like getting a note from Queen Elizabeth. "Oh, on behalf of, we thank you most sincerely for your gift. For over 100 years, our charity has been Ireland's leading independent charity advocating for the rights and the well-being and the protection of children. Our mission is to end cruelty and injustice. We want you..." But nobody cares what happened 100 years ago, right? That's the first point. Nobody cares. Maybe that board member who probably remembers the events of 100 years ago, but nobody else, right? So that's problem number one. Problem number two, again, is all about them, and historically about them, not even about the great work they're doing now, right? They're leading with exactly the wrong way to do it. Compare that with, "Dear Adrian, somewhere in Ireland, a child is calling for help. Because of you, a caring voice answers." Ooh. Yeah, how good do you feel at that point? And do you notice what Lisa's done again? She's embraced me as being part of this great work that's going on out there, right? We're not separate, we're in a relationship. And you know what? The relationship is so close It's us together that are making a difference for those children today. In my experience, the thank you note is usually the communication that receives the least thought. And often, too often, it gets left to the most junior member of the team, or worse, the accounting function. And you can imagine what they're going to get from that, right? So this is a communication that is hugely important because people remember it. And we know that from other work we've done, the memory of that thank you lingers, and it lingers a lot longer than you might think. It is still driving behavior 5 months out. So is it worth getting the language of that right? Oh yes, massive. So we've talked about a whole range of things. We've talked about why loyalty and retention is an issue. I said small improvements in loyalty deliver big improvements in value. We talked about key metrics. We talked about some of the customer retention research. We talked about donor retention research. And I've just thrown out a few ideas there of things that you can play with practically to make a difference to loyalty for your organization. So I'm going to shut up at that point and see if there are any questions. Jen, I'll hand back over control to you. You will need to unmute though.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. Robert wants to know kind of what the role of emotion is in fundraising. And he tells a story of how he loves his university, so he supports his university, and he also hates cancer because someone in his family is suffering from it. He's wondering, isn't that something we really need to know about our donors, what their emotion is, and if so, how do you find out?
Couple of points on that. Number one, he's quite right to flag it. Emotion is absolutely key in driving action, right? The difference between emotion and logic is that logic leads to conclusions. And as fundraisers, we don't need conclusions, right? Whereas emotion leads to action. So particularly in the new donor acquisition kind of scenario, you need people to feel something. And as fundraisers, we have to be thinking about what the right emotions might be to generate so that people might be motivated to give to the work of our organization. The second point I'd say on that is that what interests me as a fundraising researcher is identity, which is not so much why people give to your organization, but what people are saying about themselves when they do. Right, so I might be a father, I might be a cancer survivor, I might be a Republican, I might be an Indianapolis person, whatever we call people who come from Indianapolis. I can be a whole range of these sort of different identities. And once you understand who people are, it's easier, I think, to think about the range of emotions that you might want to make that kind of person feel, or would be appropriate for that kind of person to feel as they think about supporting our organization. And identities you can gather in a donor survey. And I think more people are beginning to do these donor surveys now so that it can help inform the annual fundraising process.
That's right. I didn't know if Nathan wanted to chime in there about the surveys. I know that's something that we at Stelter really promote as a good idea.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, that's such a great tool. And we saw that especially during the COVID. We had a captured audience. People were willing to and wanting to connect and share and give feedback. And yeah, it's been a great tool for a long time, but especially during this last 18 months.
I think that's right. I think there's been, or at least there's beginning to be an understanding. In the old days, we used to think about surveys as a market research tool, right? So surveys gave us data. And we could use some of that data maybe for segmentation, but that's how we viewed it. These days, I think smarter organizations are viewing the survey as a relationship building tool. They can be written very much in the brand style of the organization. If humor is an element of that, there can be an element of humor in the survey. They reflect the values of the organization. And we use it as a way to get closer to people and to find ways to initiate that stronger sense of relationship. And if it's done nicely, it will be a relationship building tool, not just a market research tool.
We've got a quick one for you. Thank you notes. Who should sign them? Should it be the person that is in contact in touch with you, or should it be like, say, the president or the CEO?
That's a really good question, isn't it? I think it should be somebody who knows that your gift had the impact that your thank you note is telling them it's had. So that might be the chief executive, or it might be somebody that's involved with the service provision in some way, or it might even be the fundraiser, but just somebody that's well placed. So this person would know that my gift has made the difference that it's had. To be honest, though, the thing that's going to drive it is, or drive success with thanking, is more thinking about what's the strategy here. Am I thanking them for the gift? Am I thanking them for the impact of the gift? Or am I thanking them for being the kind of person that they are? Or maybe for being the kind of person that they would like to be? All of these, of course, are different thanking strategies, and they're more applicable at different points in the relationship. So early on, I'd be making sure I was thanking for the impact that the gift has achieved. Once you've known that person for an extended period of time, then I think you can talk to them about the kind of person that they are, because at that point, it's not too presumptive, right? You've got to know the kind of person that they are, so you can tell them what a great, moral, loving, caring person they are, and it's believable because you know. Later on in the relationship, even further, you can thank them for all that they've meant to you, right? So the thank you becomes even more personal. So that the thank you note shouldn't be a generic across everybody, right? It should reflect where people are in the relationship.
Wonderful, thank you. And unfortunately, we are just right up against our time. So I'm going to go ahead. We had a couple, just for you to know, we've had some people write in and just thank you for this fantastic presentation, Adrian. So thank you so much. If we did not get to your question, we had a couple here that we didn't get to. Adrian has offered to speak with you or communicate with you through email. His email is on the screen, adrian@philanthropy-institute.org.uk. You can reach out to him personally. If you have questions about Stelter or our products or services, you can reach out to Nathan or myself. And then finally, we did record it today. So as long as everything went the way it was supposed to, we'll have the recording and we'll also have the presentation handouts. Those will be posted by Friday on our website at stelter.com/webinars. And I will be sending an email out to let you know when they're there, so you can download them at that point. And that's the end, guys. Thanks so much for being here with us. And Adrian, we wholeheartedly thank you for your time. I know it's evening for you where you're at right now, so I'm sure you're ready to be done with your day.
Thanks very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.